Hey, it's Kevin DeWitt here. Welcome back to the Mixing in a Home Music Studio course. In this video, we're going to talk about gates. So firstly, if you are new to my channel and new to my videos and you like what you see, click the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be notified of all my future videos. So a gate. Gates reduce noise from tracks. They clean up parts. They can be used as effects. They have similar settings to like a compressor with a few variances there, but you know, we've got several options like threshold and that sort of stuff that can be very similar. But I guess the best way to describe it is, let's say we've got a snare drum. Now we can set up a gate. So we've got a microphone on a snare drum, okay? And it's hitting away. And in between snare hits, you might hear bleed from other drums, snare, kick, whatever else. It'll be coming through the microphone. You'll hear it in your audio track. You can just hear it. It's lower volume, but it's there. Now with a gate, you can set up the controls, etc., so that in between snare hits, so let's say the snare hits, it goes above the threshold setting and the gate opens and lets that audio pass. As soon as the audio goes below that threshold, the gate closes and it stops all audio going through. Now you can also set a gate so it doesn't stop all audio. It may pass some, but it will reduce it in volume. But you can clamp down and have it pass none. So it'll be just a silence, right? You can do that. Gates is sort of a little bit tricky to explain in words like this, so I think probably best to go into more detail in the software. So let's just get into it, and I'll explain it more with some examples, and hopefully it'll make all perfect sense to you.
Now, if you look at a simple gate, this is just one that comes with Cubase, so this is just an example. You do not need to use this one. You just need to find a gate that is inbuilt in your DAW, or get a separate gate plugin from a third party if you wish. But the controls will be very similar. They'll obviously be slightly different, but the concept will be the same. Now, if you look at the settings, you would almost think that you were looking at a compressor because you've got very much the same settings. You know, you've got an attack, you've got a release, and you've got a threshold. The only thing you don't have is a ratio. So the gate works very similarly to a compressor, but obviously it's doing a different function here. So the threshold in this case is actually determining at what level we're deciding is a real signal and what is noise. So what we're looking for is the signal to go below this threshold, so for the gate to start or to close. If I set it to this level here, we're stating that if the signal goes above minus 27.6 dB, then we're going to assume that that's a kick hit. If it's below that value, we're going to assume that it's noise, and we will want the gate to be closed and to silence the track out. Now, how quickly that kicks in when it drops below the threshold is determined by the release. So it's sort of a little bit backwards in a way. So the release is when it releases the gate and lets it shut. So the faster the speed, the quicker it'll close as soon as the signal goes below the threshold. The bigger the value, the slower it will be to close, so it'll let the signal decay away a little bit before it closes the gate. Now the attack is on the other end, and it determines how quickly the gate will release and open up when the signal goes above the threshold. So again, the smaller the number, the quicker it will open the gate back up and let the kick through. The bigger the number, the slower it will take. So it'll just slowly come in and open the gate up. Now on top of that, we can also set a range value here so that we can actually say that we don't want to totally silence it. So obviously if we go to infinity, as soon as that gate closes, it just silence. But we might want to use this gate to reduce the amount of bleed and the amount of noise, but not totally get rid of it. We might want to keep it in so that it sounds a little bit more natural, but it's just a little bit too much. You know, let's say we've got a hi-hat that's bleeding into the kick. That might be making our hi-hat stand out too much and is too loud in the mix, and we're finding it hard to control. So we might use this to reduce the amount of the hi-hat bleed in the kick, but not totally get rid of it. So we can do that by adjusting this range setting here. So obviously infinity will get rid of it. Anything above that will reduce it down to sort of that level of dB there. So we can take it all the way up so it does nothing, but you can adjust the setting there as you like. So the trick with gates is that they can be a little bit fiddly to set up, and it takes a little bit of practice. And when I say practice, I mean on every track. You basically need to be playing the track and you need to fine tune these settings. They all work in together. So it's a balancing act of what do you set the threshold to, how do you set the release, the attack, and then the range setting, and you tweak and come back and tweak and tweak and tweak until you get it to the right one, because it can be very hard at times depending on how close the bleed and the noise is to the actual real signal. Obviously, if you've got major differences and the kick or whatever it is instrument is stands out massively, it's way louder than the noise, then you're going to have an easier job to actually set up a gate. But the closer they are, the harder it's going to get. So I guess the best place to start is if we start with our range at infinity and our attack and release as fast as possible, and then we can have a look to try and set our threshold roughly to where we think we want it. Okay, so with our plug-in bypassed, here's the sound of the kick. So you can hear there the kick is hitting at a sort of slow BPM, but you're getting a lot of snare bleed into the track there. So in its default state, if we kick this plugin in, this is what we end up with. And at its basic setting there, it's not doing too bad a job. So let's just play with the threshold and sort of see what it does. So at that setting there, we're obviously doing nothing. So my suggestion is that you take the gate down to a low value so everything gets passed through, and then slowly wind it up while it's playing until you get it just to the point where the bleed disappears. Because if you go too far, you'll hear that starting to really cut out the kick. We want to try and keep the kick sounding as natural as possible. We don't want it sounding unnatural. So I might bring it back down till I start hearing too much snare come in again. Okay, so let's say we like it there, and that's doing a pretty good job. Now let's have a play with the release setting here to see what that does in regards to our gate coming in and out. So if we put it to a big number there, it's basically letting everything through and it's not gating at all. And then if we bring it to our lower setting there, you can hear the kick starts to sound a little bit unnatural again. We're chopping the kick off a little bit too much. So the best thing to do is, as you're doing your settings, keep bypassing the plugin to make sure that you refresh your ears of what the sound of the kick actually was. Because sometimes you can trick yourself into starting to like the new sound, not realizing what damage you're doing to the kick. Because if you listen to it in bypass, you can hear the tail of the kick, the nice thickness of it at the end. And when the plugin comes in, it chops it off, and all of that ambience at the end and the natural decay of the instrument is chopped off. Now, you might want that, but this is why I'm saying you need to bypass and bring it back in to make sure that's actually what you want and not just some overgating. So it's a bit of a balancing act, because you can hear there's some snare coming through. And sometimes it's a compromise. Sometimes you're just never going to get it perfect. Sometimes you need to make a decision of at what point does the kick start to sound unnatural and not the way you want it, how much you're chopping too much off the kick, and how much of the bleed are you letting in on the end of the kick. It's a fine line of getting the gate setting to where you want it to get as much noise out as possible, but without actually destroying the sound of the instrument. Now that doesn't sound too bad. I guess you have to make your mind up on that. It could be chopping a little bit too much of the kick off, or maybe not, but it's a fine tuning effort there to get that in the right place. Now let's have a look at the attack. So if we go all the way wide, we get absolutely no signal whatsoever. And if we go short, it's working fine. So this one really depends on the instrument type. Now to me, with something like a kick, I would want this to work very fast, because I want the kick, because a kick is very transient and is very, one shot, boom. You really want a fast attack on that, because you want that gate to open up instantly as soon as that kick hits. Otherwise, you've got to lose everything. If you've got a slower instrument, something like a guitar or something like that, you might be able to have the attack a little bit slower so that it doesn't just jolt straight in and it can't sort of fades in a little bit. But with a kick, you really want it to come straight in. So in the case here, the attack's not really going to do much for us other than having it fast. Okay, and then we could say, all right, I'm happy with that, but I really don't want to get rid of all of that bleed. I just want to cut it down. So now we can adjust our range. So that's basically doing nothing. And you might just like it there. You might just want to bring that level down of that bleed. or you might want to go to infinity. So as tight as that sounded, and it didn't sound too bad, I did feel possibly we were losing a little bit of the sub oomph to this kick. So, winding that back, that release a little bit, allowed a little bit of that through, but it also then did allow some of the bleed through. So again, like I said, there's the balancing act of making sure that the kick sounds the way you want it to sound and controlling the bleed. So the last thing you want to do is destroy the instrument to get your gate working. Now, in this case here, we also have this hold setting. So we could actually set these up pretty tight, but we can also tell it that we want it to hold for a certain length of time. And this whole setting is basically determining to keep the gate open for a certain amount of time. So you can hear there, I've made it sound a little bit unnatural, but you might want the gate to close very quickly, but because you've got a steady beat and a steady tempo, you know that you want it to hold open for a certain length of time. But when the hold has reached its value, then the gate shuts very quickly instead of slowly. So you can do that to get some more consistent results there. If you know you have a predetermined time, then you can allow it to do that by setting a value. So in this example, like I've done, I've clamped down on the kick to make it sound unnatural. So we've gone as fast release as possible. And not that you would do this, but you can hear how unnatural that sounds there. So I've got a hold to allow the kick to go through, but then the release, after that hold timer reaches, just shuts instantly. But you can hear we're getting that snare sort of shit at the end. So that's what that setting is doing there. Now, obviously what I've done here is not sounding the greatest, but you get the idea of what could be done if you had a clean sort of set out value there and you just wanted to close and open very quickly with a set period of time being held open, then you can use the hold setting there. So that's the basics of a gate. You can use this on any instrument you like, anything that needs sort of cleaning up there. You can use it on vocals, guitars, whatever you feel could do with some silencing in between parts and closing off. Now, depending on the instrumentation, sometimes I prefer to actually lean towards the method of doing things manually, which is actually going in and cutting parts and cleaning parts out myself. But it depends on the track. In the case of here, I would not do that because there's just so much that you would have to cut out. But in regards to, say, a tom track where maybe there's, half a dozen hits through the entire song, I would just go and cut those hits and then just silence all the other parts and just put some fades on the end of those toms. Or in regards to vocals, because you want to be so particular with the vocals, I might do the same thing there. I might just chop and silence the long gaps between vocal passages manually instead of using a gate. But it really depends on what you're trying to achieve, and it depends on how much you would have to do that and how much time you will save by using a gate. But the main thing is to make sure that if you are using a gate, you don't want to set it to a point that you have made the instrument or the vocal or whatever else sound unnatural, or have lost all of its sonic qualities, etc., because you're slamming this gate on everything.
So there you go, that is gates and how you can use it on your tracks. Let me know what you think in the comments. Let me know if you have any further questions, or if I didn't explain something enough, or you didn't understand something. Please do put follow-up questions in the comments. I read all the comments and I'll answer as many of the comments and questions as I possibly can, as quickly as I can. If you did like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell to be notified of all my future videos. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.